The small intestine is another classic example of the overall organization of the four layers of the gastrointestinal system. Like most other gastrointestinal organs that have a lumen, we have a mucosa, we have a submucosa, we have a muscularis, and we have a serosa. The reason why I said serosa for small intestine is virtually the entire small intestine, jejunum or ileum, is covered by peritoneum and is intraperitoneal. So if you look closely, you may see some mesothelial cell linings on the surface, which I hope we will see. Otherwise, let's review the classical layers, and it really doesn't matter where we start. Also, I don't think it's really that important that we differentiate histologically between ileum and jejunum. Let's just say there's a few subtle differences. And of course, the main one is that the ileum has more submucosal infoldings. The jejunum has more submucosal infoldings called plicae, but the ileum has more lymphoid tissue in the submucosa, often referred to as Peyer's patches. Let's run it down, and logically, let's go from the lumen to the outside. The mucosa of the small intestine is arranged in a very distinctly papillary fashion. You could see these clear cells, which are goblet cells, and the cells which are not clear are absorptive cells. The chief job of the small intestine is absorption, so there is an abundance of absorptive cells. As you go further down, you'll get more goblet cells. So generally there's more goblet cells also in the ileum relative to the jejunum. The lamina propria constitutes the core of these papillary or villus or villi in the mucosa, and like any other lamina propria is rich in cells like lymphocytes, macrophages, fibroblasts, blood vessels, and of course, in addition, you will see many of these lymphatic looking spaces, in other words, thin endothelial line spaces with no blood cells, which are the lacteals. So here is a goblet cell of the epithelium of the mucosa. Here are some absorptive cells. Here's the lamina propria. Here are the various connective tissue and lymphoid cells of the lamina propria, such as macrophages, lymphocytes, plasma cells. Here perhaps is a small either blood vessel or lacteal. And here we are traveling now further into the deeper parts of the mucosa. And we can see pretty much the same type of arrangement. We see a lot of lymphocytes here. And we are now very close to the end of the mucosa. And that's why we're starting to see some lymphoid patches in the submucosa, which are very, very, very abundant. What you see here is probably a remnant of a muscularis mucosa, or perhaps a little dip of submucosal connective tissue. I really don't know yet. I suspect it's just the fibrous connective tissue. Here is the connective tissue of the submucosa. Here is a secondary lymphoid nodule or lymphoid follicle in the submucosa. Notice these extend into the mucosa as well. Here is the relatively loose pink connective tissue of the submucosa. Here are some blood vessels or lymphatics. Also note how easy it is to confuse spindly fibroblasts of submucosal connective tissue with spindly nuclei of smooth muscle cells. Only a trichrome stain can basically solve the difference in many cases, because the collagen will stain bluish green and the smooth muscle fibers won't. You know these are circular fibers because they are spindly when we cut the colon transversely to the axis, and you know these are longitudinal outer fibers. You know occasionally you'll see little connections of neural or ganglion looking cells, between the longitudinal and circular layer, which represent the myenteric plexus. Notice we have some connective tissue of the serosa, blood vessel, artery, vein, fat, connective tissue. And last but not least, these tiny little cells all the way out on the surface are the mesothelial cells, like here, possibly here, but definitely here. Probably a couple here which are slightly out of focus. Very possibly there, probably there, probably there. And this is what makes it a serosa, or a peritoneum, or a visceral peritoneum, rather than just a connective tissue adventitia. Let's go back in. Mesothelial cells, serosal connective tissue, outer longitudinal muscle fibers, probably a couple of nerve cells in the myenteric plexus, circular, spindly arranged smooth muscle, submucosal connective tissue, some blood vessels in the submucosa. There's an artery. There's probably a vein there and there. There's some lymphoid tissue. Whenever you get a lot of lymphoid tissue, you know that you're probably in the ileum rather than jejunum. There's an extension of submucosal connective tissue, possibly to form a plica, P-L-I-C-A, circularis, which increases the mucosal surface area. This is the mucosa now, because you could see the glands, you could see the lamina propria. You may see a little few smooth muscle bundles of the muscularis mucosae. And last but not least, we're still in the mucosa. We could see goblet cells, we could see absorptive cells, and we could see at the very, very surface these nice, perfect little villi. We can't really go any further, but I can guarantee you most of these cells are our plasma cells and lymphocytes, macrophages. And that's either a capillary or a lymphatic. That's either a capillary or a lymphatic. That's probably a lymphatic. But if it has a blood vessel in it, I'll change my theory. And the rest of this stuff is what we call caca, and you could even see the tiny bacterial rods as well. Thank you very much.